Patrice ONWUKA, we lost a dear friend in Sam. I always enjoy seeing you guys paired together on the panels. What a great loss.
All right, my condolences to him and to you. He really was a principled man, and that came across no matter how many times we were together. I'm sorry to hear that happen.
Let me stay with you. Hello, Andrew. I'll get back to you. Ms. ONWUKA, Todd Blanche's nomination has encountered resistance from Republican senators, Tillis, Cronin. And is this simply the normal give and take of Senate confirmations, or is it an early warning that President Trump may face an increasing resistance from members of his own party as his administration advances its agenda? In other words, he's taking out Cronin and others within his own party. The chickens are coming home to roost.
Good to see you, Armstrong. I think some of the pushback he's receiving are from some members who don't have very long left in the Senate anyway. So they're certainly going to be leaving a mark on his ability to carry out his agenda for the president's agenda for the next 2.5 years. Todd Blanche, he's seemingly been, the president's pick. He hasn't had anything too tumultuous over the past since his nomination. His name was brought up for nomination. But that said, I think the Senate has a lot of antipathy with President Trump, unfortunately, just over, key pieces of legislation like the Save America Act that President Trump wants to see done. And also, certainly President Trump has been pushing for the end of the filibuster. And a lot of Republican senators are not bought into that strategy and agenda. So maybe that's partly driving their pushback against Todd Blanche's nomination. We'll see. I mean, I would hope that even if you were on your way out of the U.S. Senate, that you were at least principled enough as a conservative to say, let the president be able to have the people he wants in office to get his job done for the next 2.5 years.
Andrew Donaldson, what is the future of the Save America Act, and why is it being slowed down, delayed, and why is it the president just cannot seem to get this across the finish line?
Because there's not the votes for it, and it's full form as advertised. No, it's not going to go anywhere, but I think a lot of it's still going to get passed because we know how this game goes. They're up against the funding limits. They're up against the CR limits. They're going to have to pass these budget things. So what they're probably going to end up doing is piecemealing this out, sticking it to must-pass legislation, and they'll still get big chunks of it through. But trying to make it into like the one big beautiful bill where they're going to get all this Save America stuff jammed in is one thing. There just ain't the votes there for it. And it tells you because it's pretty much the one piece of legislation that the U.S. Senate has explicitly told President Trump, there's not votes for this, we're not going to get it passed. I think they'll take provisions of it, they'll piecemeal it out as they get into the crunch time here, coming out of the August recess. They'll push it through that way, but yeah, there just ain't the votes for it. It's just a math problem right now.
Patrice ONWUKA, why can't we just admit what everyone else knows? Because I don't know any other name to call it, but the fact that we are at war.
With Iran, yeah, I mean, well, who declares war officially? That's, I think, the key here. We are in a conflict. We are certainly in, the U.S. military is part of what's the conflict in the Middle East right now. And I think that there's the question of who has the power and has the authority. President Trump is acting like many other presidents have to, carry out campaigns in the Middle East against Iran. And so he has a lot more authority by doing that. And so he's trying to flex his authority without getting that Senate or the approval of Congress. And I think that's what's going on here. That said, this isn't exactly the best time, given that we've got the midterms less than 100 days away. And, for him to have allies in the House and the Senate to continue forward in the future, providing funding for this war effort, he's going to need allies. And I think allies are going to need to be either reelected or new allies brought in. And that happens when you win elections. And so that is a pretty tenuous balance right now that I think the White House has in mind, although President Trump has been pretty clear. Listen, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to deal with Iran, even if there are consequences for the Republican Party at the ballot box this November. He's fine to do that. That said, it's going to be harder for him to advance his agenda if he doesn't have allies and if there is a massive sweeping out of the party in power.
Let me build on Ms. ONWUKA's narrative Mr. Donaldson. Listen, between escalating conflicts in the Middle East, Russian aggression, China, military posture, cyber attacks, and attacks on commercial shipping, are we already living through a new kind of global war, even if Congress, according to Ms. ONWUKA, has formally never declared one? If so, what does that mean for America, its military, economy, foreign policy, and the fact that many people are saying that we're really short on warheads and fighting ammunition and all the things that are necessary. They're depleting our military resources, and China is sitting back laughing.
Yeah, and to that long list you need to put a couple more things on there, like the drone warfare stuff, that we need to do a rapid change of function on how we do war and pay attention to what's going on in Ukraine and the Middle East. That sort of thing. Look at the economic consequences of these things. All those add in. I've paneled with her enough. Her take is astute. You need allies when you're the president, and Congress needs an ally in the White House when it comes to warfare. And they're not on the same page right now. Now, some of that's the president's fault. He should have went to Congress. He should have pushed this through. He should have followed the procedure. And part of it's on Congress, who, and this isn't President Trump's fault, he's just following precedent. As she mentioned, presidents have been pushing executive authority to conduct strikes and campaigns all over the world for decades now without Congress reeling that authority back in. So there's a couple things going on at once, but the basis of it is our government and two of the three branches of government are not getting along when we're putting troops in harm's way. And you can call it whatever you want, but when people are seeing flag-draped transfer cases come back to Dover, they're going to go, we're in a war and we need to deal with it as such. And then as far as the consequences like you're talking about, globally, people see that our government is not on the same page. So when Congress and the president are not on the same page and we start getting the partisan fights over warfare, our enemies worldwide see that and they're going to take advantage of it. And right now, we don't have a good understanding of how Iran's operating, but Iran is seeing all this. They've got a good understanding of it, and they know they can try to wait this out until an election or the president gets bored or there's too much economic consequences or there's too many political consequences. And that is the calculus that we're seeing from Iran right now. And you know that Russia and China and our other adversaries are paying very close attention to it.
Ms. ONWUKA, you are certainly a foreign policy expert and very astute. It seems that Iran wants an all-out war. They don't want a peace agreement. They're attacking our ships. They're firing on our troops in Jordan. What is the thinking of Iran? Or what has changed? Or has anything ever changed when it's come to their agenda when this war started, what, almost 2 or 3 months ago?
Yeah. Iran is motivated by something very different than I think us as Americans, we still can't comprehend. They are motivated by generations, hundreds if not thousands of years of belief in fighting against the infidel, in fighting against any sort of philosophies that would challenge their norms and values and view of the world. They are willing to, they talk about jihad. They are serious. I think Americans, you have people marching in the street talking about, revolution and regime change. They're not serious. They go back and grab a Starbucks and jump on their $800 phone and then pick back up with their signs a little bit later after they've had their fun. But you're talking about Iran and the leaders in Iran and the military in Iran. They are motivated by something very deeply, and they are willing to sacrifice their children, their women, and themselves for a cause that they believe in. And I think that's why they're willing to wait out the president, play these games where one part of the government is apparently negotiating while the other is launching attacks not just on Americans but on the allies, foreign allies in the region. They're willing to play this game because they know that Americans do get tired and get distracted very quickly. And I think they going into this conflict at the start, we were all told and led to believe by the president and by the administration that this would be a pretty quick in and out. We have the power. We will do shock and awe. And I think in the early weeks of this campaign, we were shocked and awed by the impressive weaponry that the United States has and the assets that we have. But we haven't actually finished the job to the point where you crush to the bones, frankly, the Iranian regime and its military and its military, because until you do, you're always going to have that. You're going to have those elements of people who don't care if it means that they give up their grandchild to crush the infidel. They will do it, and they will use the Houthis. We are seeing the Houthis now, sticking their nose out in the Strait of Hormuz to try to continue to cause trouble with vessels there. So it's a challenge. It's really something where we have to be committed to doing whatever it takes. Armstrong, the last time I was on here, I said, I don't see diplomacy getting things done. I actually just see that there has to be a very strong military response that closes the books on Iran's leadership for us to actually feel like the job gets done. And I hope I'm wrong, but so far I'm back here again, and here we are.
Mr. Donaldson, why did the House Ways and Means Committee pass the Foreign Funding Transparency Act, and what does that mean?
They had to do something, so let's get that out of the way. So there was some legislative back and forth here. It's like, this is one of those things where the title and the idea behind it is really, really good. Did the fine print match up? I'm not completely sure. We need more accountability and more transparency in all sorts of things, but I'm not sure that you go to a government committee or a piece of legislation to get that. We need a lot of transparency when this stuff's going on. We had reporting just this week about the issues that the CCP and the amount of money the Chinese regime is spending on things like media personalities, on things like higher education. We know the Middle East, there's a lot of people who are our allies in certain ways, like the GCC countries, but they're also pumping a lot of money into things like higher academia, and we see them buying things like sports washing and using culture. There's a lot of that going on, and we know intuitively that that kind of money finds its way into the government also. Now, is this legislation going to fix that? I have my doubts. I think there's some flaws in this legislation. Do we need to put a spotlight on it and do more about it? Absolutely we do. But right now, the rhetoric and the actual amount of money flowing through government culture and media and entertainment isn't matching up with what we probably need to do to be really vigilant about foreign influence.
Let me say this before we go to break. I saw where President Trump just slammed Corning and Tillis about not supporting his star nominee for Attorney General, Todd Blanche. Does the president ever remember his own actions as to why they got to the place where they are now? Mr. Donaldson, does he ever?
No.
Does he think everybody operates on principle, including him? That they cannot have feelings and they have emotions that build up after spending so many years in the Senate, and they get defeat because the president decided to campaign against him? Does he ever think that's a reality as well?
One of the strengths of President Donald J. Trump is he puts one foot in front of it forward and goes forward and just puts his head down and presses on no matter what. One of his great character flaws is he puts his head down and puts one foot in front of the order and goes forward like nothing else ever happened, no matter what. And that's what you're talking about here. He's very much a person of the moment. He wants what he wants. He's very driven. That helps him in a lot of circumstances, and it hurts him in others. And when you're dealing with people like Congress, who are going to be in office after him because he's in his lame duck term, they don't have the same motivations he does. He doesn't even think that way. He doesn't. It's not even a criticism. It's just the way he's built.
Unfortunately. And we'll be back. Yes, ma'am. Ms. ONWUKA, you and Mr. Donaldson are two of my favorite journalists, okay? You guys are so substantive, so well-read, so informed, because there's no preparation here. There's no cheating on this platform because they have no idea what I'm going to ask, no matter what I tell Aaron as he's booking you. But anyhow, amid two extraordinarily public and emotional funerals honoring Senator Lindsey Graham. You know, Senator Graham, I've known him since I was in my 20s. And it's just very emotional. You know, at funerals, Ms. ONWUKA, the faces may change, the music may be different, but the emotions are always the same for me. And so I just want to say, his sister, Darlene Graham, displays such remarkable grace, dignity, and strength. Because normally, she's a candidate to replace her brother. She could have spoken at both funerals, she could have had press conferences, but she chose to honor her brother by showing how deeply she loved and cared for him. And so it reminds us about character under pressure, and why do we so often overlook the quiet courage of families during moments of national attention? Ms. ONWUKA.
You know, what was remarkable when she decided that she would continue out his the remainder of Senator Graham's term in office, and she spoke publicly. It was probably about a minute, if so much. And you could tell she couldn't wait to get off of the dais and get out of the views of the camera. And what I saw, and after reading about their story, is someone who said, my brother was there for me when our parents died, and he stepped up for me. He could have put his life on, he put his life on hold to support her and see her through to adulthood. And to me, she was saying, I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm going to put my life, my things aside, and I'm going to finish out this term and potentially run for the seat because I want to finish my brother's job the way he did the job for his parents to help her. And there is something about people who, family members who also serve alongside civil servants. You know, you look at the Trump family, you look at the Obama family, look at the Biden family. You know, it's the brothers, it's the sisters. Some of them take advantage, let's be honest here. Some of them want to pilfer as much as they can from having their sibling in office or their family member in office. But others do it because they realize that this is so important to the person they love that they're willing to make that sacrifice. And when that person has to move on, they will carry on the mantle because they want to carry with honor, you know, what their family member meant. And in this moment, my condolences to the Graham family, but I really hope she does well. And I really hope she continues the agenda, the things that Senator Graham really held dear and were most important to him, and does it. She doesn't have to do it just like him, but certainly in a way that honors his memory. And I think that just given how she's operated so far, she will do that.
Ms. Donaldson, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear says Senator Mitch McConnell should either demonstrate he is capable of serving or step aside. Where is the line between respecting a lifetime of public service and recognizing when it is time to pass the torch? You know, it's funny. Charles Grassley is in the Senate. He's 92 years old. Nancy Pelosi is 86. Jim Clyburn is 86. Eleanor Holmes Norton is 89. I mean, look, not everybody ages the same. How do you balance the two? Time to move on and the politics of Beshear's comments, because obviously he has his own agenda. He would like to run for that seat.
Yeah, let's start with the agenda. Beshear would either like that seat or maybe running for president, one or the other. He's running for something else, and he's doing that. He has the ability. I get really aggravated with one of these things. I know it's part and parcel, but he knows how to call Senate Mitch McConnell's office and talk to Mitch McConnell's person. He's done that many, many times. This is all public PR because, no, he's not actually going to remove him or any of the other fantasy stuff people are bugging. He's just trying to make some social media bank out of it. Now, having said that,
and raise money, and
he's raising his profile,
yes.
And he's running to do the meme. He's running, and I get really annoyed at that because he knows exactly what Mitch McConnell's status is because he already made that phone call. Let's all be adults. Now, should Mitch McConnell resign? I believe he should. Now, I know he already announced he's not going to run for re-election, and you can't honor a man who's spent, a good chunk of his human life in the Senate. But yes, there's a time when these things go, and we've seen some really horrific examples, bipartisan, by the way. If we're going to call, what happened with Dianne Feinstein was an absolute travesty, and her staff and family should be ashamed of herself. And there's others that we could list of, frankly, abusive, where the staffs and the political machines want to put people in their place and keep them there because it empowers them to do so. There is a geriocracy problem with our government. Even though you may have a Grassley who's very, very sharp at an advanced age, or a Clyburn who I just, because I do South Carolina media, he's been all over the place on this Senate race. He's sharp as a tack. Those are the exceptions, not the rules. And we do probably need to have a conversation because we as a society especially don't know how to deal with aging and mortality and the fact that we all have a running clock on how long we're going to have on this planet. And we have a really big problem with it when you start putting the money and power politics with it.
Someone recently asked Congressman Clyburn how is he able to keep it all intact. And he said just a little Jack Daniels every now and then. So I'll leave it. I'll let you guys figure it out. But Ms. ONWUKA, we are not going to conclude talking to you and Mr. Donaldson today unless we talk about Dr. Fauci repeatedly invoking his Fifth Amendment's rights before Congress this week. Now, while that is a constitutional protection, does exercising that right satisfy the public? You know, so many women face infertility today as a result of COVID. So many school kids still suffer today as a result of schools being shut down. So many people are paralyzed today because of the COVID. And if you look at his diaries, he knew the distancing did not work. He knew the mask did not work. There was so much that he knew that did not work. I mean, and the Biden administration gave him a pardon where he had the free will to say whatever he wanted to say. Why did he not come clean? Why 111 times? Why? We deserve answers.
Frustrating. It was maddening, and it angered me. I try to put myself in the place of people who still think that he is a hero, still believe that he got us through the pandemic. If you believe that, you probably are listening to news sources not like this show, unfortunately, where Armstrong actually brings on people with lots of different perspectives. You're probably just hearing the sanitized version of Fauci. He did so much damage in different ways. The direct damage, you know, you listed some of those off. I had a COVID baby. He was born in 2020, and I almost didn't get to even have my husband. I didn't even almost get to hold my baby when I was born because of the ridiculous rules that, you know, were implemented at the time. There's so many people who missed out on key moments. And let's not forget, so many people lost their parents and their grandparents when they were housed in elder care facilities that became incubators and fast spreaders of the disease based on Fauci's recommendations to policymakers. That's the look back. But really, this should have been an opportunity to look ahead. And we saw some questions like that from some of the different senators who said, you know what, you have done some incredible damage with the public trust in the healthcare, the health apparatus, both the medical professionals, but also the health policy people, the people who we expect when there is another pandemic to tell us what to do. And there are so many people, Senator John Fetterman, Democrat, said this. There are so many people who in the next pandemic will simply tune out, will not listen to the health professionals because they don't believe in what they were told. After they find out that you knew truth, you knew facts, and you withheld that, or you told your friends something that you withheld from the public and told the public to do something very different. And yes, he had an opportunity at that hearing to say, you know what? I was wrong at the time. I own that. I take accountability for that. And I don't want Americans to lose trust in our health apparatus because there will be a future pandemic. There will be diseases. There will be needs for vaccinations that people will simply not take because of the ramifications they endured because of my bad choice and decision making. He could have said that, but that would tarnish his image. And he wants to go down in history as the face of science, as he called himself. And anyone who questions science, which I pretty much think that scientists do with each other as new information comes forward. But he put himself almost on a pedestal like he was God in some ways. And to be there to actually look at the people whose lives he damaged or the system that he's supposed to be protecting, it was not just a missed opportunity, it was malpractice.
Some will say he will not only go down in history as the face of science, he will go down in the history as the face of death and crippling side effects that people are going to suffer with for the rest of their lives. I mean, you reminded me, people could not attend their funerals. You could not have weddings.
Yes.
I mean, the impact was just overwhelming. And for him to just think that he can skate by pleading the fifth for 111 times, people should be upset. Their lives have been altered forever. Now, Mr. Donaldson, and I got that out. I'm telling you, it's an emotional one today, what I think about Fauci. But anyhow, I'm human. Japan, what a devastating earthquake and resulting tsunami. Warning reminds us how quickly nature can alter our lives to even the course of a nation. And beyond the immediate humanitarian response, with so many other things going on, Mr. Donaldson, and not a lot of people reported on this, what lessons should our country and others take from Japan, preparedness and resilience in the face of these repeated natural disasters that just keep coming and coming and coming?
Yeah, the Japanese people have a unique resiliency to them on a lot of levels. They have an amazing civil authority, and I don't mean that in their government structure. I mean, when they have disasters, when they need to do humanitarian stuff, their culture and their society and their civil authority is really something we should study. And we can't emulate it perfectly, but we could learn some lessons from our Japanese friends on how they handle these sorts of things. And we know we have it. We saw massive tornadoes in Wisconsin and other places. My home state of West Virginia just had devastating flooding and several tornadoes, and we're going to see more and more. We see the wildfires going on. We see earthquakes all around the world. There is nothing that can be more important than being prepared for these sorts of natural disasters. When we talk about things like foreign policy and the United States military, we need to remember the United States military is the greatest force for humanitarian aid that has ever been on the face of the planet Earth. So when we're allocating resources for things like Iran and projecting power worldwide, we need to remember our military is also something that is a massive military structure, especially things like the National Guard component, which we just saw in my home state during flooding. There would have been a higher death toll without the National Guard going in and saving lives. And we see that over and over again. So remember, when we're talking about government, we're talking about foreign policy, those things affect things here. Is like those government assets, we need to make sure they're prepared for things like natural disasters, because you never know when one's going to hit. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we get took by surprise. And we have the ability to do that. But that's another reason to keep government accountable, keep them on their toes, and only elect serious people, because serious times are going to find you whether you want them to or not.
You know, Mr. Onwuka, I'm going to close this on this because your remarks about Dr. Fauci and being a mother and about your husband really tore at my heartstrings. You know, one thing about humanity, we advance in technology, we advance in wealth, we do some extraordinary things, but the human frailties remain the same. You know, I had a chance to watch the Odyssey, and, you know, Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey was one of my favorite books of literature of all times. And one thing that I remember from that is that man needs God. And why is it that we always seem to find God when things are the worst, to call on him during death and at funerals? I watched Lindsey Graham's funeral. I've never heard so much scripture on national TV in such a long time. Why is it that we just don't find him and acknowledge him in all things that we do?
I wonder that myself, but you know, sometimes people wander away, or they've never been told that that gaping hole inside of each and every one of us, which longs for something that's deeper, that provides meaning and value to who we are, beyond cars, beyond titles, beyond name recognition. There's something that we're always chasing for, and if you don't realize what it is, then you're always going to be searching for it. And then in these moments, we realize, oh, it was the person I cry out to in that moment when I say, oh, because I fear for my life. Oh, because I see that my end is near. And I think that's just that natural inclination. And somehow intrinsically, so many of us realize that it is for God that we're looking for. You know, it's Lindsey Graham's funeral, 9/11, September 11th, 2001. Those are pivotal moments during the pandemic, pivotal moments when we realized that all of the things that we amass, the wealth, the money, the status, the power, at some point, like Solomon said, it is vanity. And you realize then what is most important, what is most fundamental, and it's that search for the person, the thing, the creator, the great creator who created you, and then the creation of the beings that he provided next to you, your family, your loved ones. That really, at the end of the day, is what we're all searching for. And God bless the Graham family and Senator Graham, who had that in those last moments, knew his Lord, and also knew that his family was there for him.
And I know, Mr. Donaldson, all you want to do is say is just amen. And we'll
you got the wrong Donaldson. You need my father for that. But yeah, God reveals himself in many ways. The biggest problem is people that claim to be Christians. We need to do a better job of not getting in the way of that for folks. So,
amen. Thank you both. We'll be back with much more in this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. You see, I'm smiling because we talked about God. I love that. We'll be back. You know, Joel, the president announced that he probably will pull Todd Blanche's nomination before the committee, so he would not make any more concessions to the GOP senators. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a wise move on the part of President Trump. A number of Republicans on that committee have thus far been opposed to Blanche's nomination. I think there are quite a few very accomplished, respected lawyers across this nation who could far more readily serve in that role as Attorney General. I think it's important to realize that the role of the Attorney General is not to be the commander-in-chief of the president's personal defense attorney or to be blocking and defending just the president of the United States. That role as Attorney General is to really be the chief law enforcement of the United States. And for that reason, I think it's important that a more acceptable choice be offered. And we need an Attorney General who will firmly declare that he is in opposition to President Trump's proposed $1.776 billion slush fund from the IRS that could be distributed to political allies. It's wrong for a Republican president to do something like that, just as it would be wrong for a Democrat president to do something like that. And it's important the Attorney General recognize this.
You know, Gregory, SELTZ, the First Amendment guarantees both the free exercise of religion and prohibits government establishment of religion.
Right.
In today's increasingly polarized culture, do Americans truly understand the balance between those two constitutional principles?
Well, that's a good question. I would say no, because we've got sides who are actually arguing against the fundamental principles of the Declaration of Independence right now. I mean, someone just called the notion that your rights are inherent from God because you're created by God. They called that something like a Christian nationalist position. I said, well, no, that's the Declaration of Independence. So this idea that the founders bound the government and set the self-governing, religiously motivated citizen free as an experiment to see whether or not this polity could work. We are a republic that protects against the tyranny of the monarchy and the tyranny of the mob. If we don't understand the principles that made that happen going forward, we may actually not have the freedoms that we so cherish today.
You know, let me go back to Joe Griffith. Should Americans feel free to express their religious beliefs openly at work, in schools, and in public life? Or has there developed a cultural pressure to keep faith private? Where should that line be drawn, Joe?
Well, that's an important question. As our First Amendment liberties protect us from the government infringing on our freedom of speech and religious expression. When it comes to at the workplace, we of course have protections that ensure you can't be discriminated against or fired or denied a promotion based on your religious beliefs. Now, how one expresses those beliefs in the workplace, well, there's some discretion that's involved there. I don't believe that one should feel that they need to hide their religious beliefs or to share their faith with others. But how that is done and in which way that's appropriate, that's something that adults who have been raised with proper sensitivities and have been raised around a variety of people, this is something that we each learn on our own. But look, my religious faith, I happen to be Jewish. I don't necessarily talk about that each and every day on the job, but I'm thankful to work in an environment where I'm free to discuss religious concepts with my colleagues, many of whom who don't share all of my religious beliefs. It's back and forth. It makes for very engaging conversation. And I don't think that folks should feel as if they need to keep those religious views under wraps. There's a time and place to share, of course. We all have to get our work done day to day. But having those conversations in most environments should be welcomed.
You know, Dr. SELTZ, when religious convictions conflict with government policies or workplace rules, how should the law balance an individual's freedom of conscience with the rights and interests of others?
Well, one of the things that I think is misunderstood today is the differentiation of church and state. That is actually a biblical teaching. Okay, Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. So the point, like even in our discussion right now, we can differentiate the talk about civil, moral discussions, like what kind of people should we be? And we generally can agree that we shouldn't steal, we shouldn't kill, we shouldn't, commit adultery, we shouldn't envy. Those are foundational principles, but that's not salvation talk. And so salvation talk is that kind of religious talk that, what's finally what animates us. We are free to follow that on our, protected by the government's not the one that determines that kind of salvation talk. But we can all agree on what kind of civility we should have in the workplace. We can all agree on some foundational moral principles that make a civil society, and learning how to differentiate those discussions. And the least important one is the state discussion, civility. Put that on the bottom, demand that the state in its limited role do that. And the rest, use your, sanctified common sense to be a good neighbor to your neighbor and to your workmate.
It's interesting, Joe, around the globe, millions of people still face persecution because of their faith. Should promoting religious liberty remain a central pillar of American foreign policy? And what responsibility does America have to speak on behalf of those who cannot worship freely?
Well, promoting freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech should be a priority of the United States government. I'm thankful that it has been and still remains so. It's the key to living a good life is not just economic output. And of course, we should all be fighting for free market values and encouraging those values across the world. But you can have a wealthy society, but not have those freedoms. And that is very repressive of human beings. And look at Hong Kong, for instance. Hong Kong is a very wealthy province of China. But we now have individuals who are being incarcerated or worse for practicing their religious beliefs in a manner that's not approved of by the communist government, or in the case of newspaper publishers or blogs, people that are incarcerated into their old age for daring to challenge policies of the regime. So I think it's very important that our leaders, including the president, speak out clearly in defense of human liberties, and in some instances, sanctions or other punishments on the economies of regimes that repress human liberty. Those sanctions would be in order, even if it might impact us negatively in our pocketbooks.
But Dr. SELTZ, America's founders believed religion played the central role in forming virtuous citizens. Can our democracy remain healthy if faith and moral formation become less influential in public life, or have other institutions taken their place? And what does history tell us?
Well, I mean, just the discussion we were just talking about can religious liberty be a value outside of America? Religious liberty is not an American value. It's a reality.
Yes.
It's a self-evident truth. And so the notion that government is the highest authority is what we're fighting against. The founders actually said, you have these inalienable rights, but they talked more about your duties to God. Because if you were a citizen who felt that your conscience duties to God and government undergirded that, we wouldn't need a harsh government to control you. You'd be self-governing. So they were talking about reality, and government has to honor that reality. So I think if you abdicate this understanding, if the church abdicates its role and we abdicate our desire to be in relationship with God, there's no government that's going to give us the kind of freedoms that we have now.
Well, looking ahead, what do you believe will be the greatest challenge to religious freedom, Joel, over the next decade? And what should government, religious institutions, and civil society do now to protect this fundamental liberty? Joel?
Well, there's two items that come to, yes. There's two items that come to mind. One is the ability of parents to choose the type of education that they want for their children. We have seen a number of countries across Europe that are denying the right of parents to give their children the religious education of their choosing. Now, thankfully, in this country, the right of parents to choose the education of their children is a recognized constitutional right. But we've seen in the past that rights can be eroded when members of the Supreme Court are replaced. And I can envision an era in the future where some states, such as California, would deny the rights of parents to provide that type of a religious education, or parents in New York City, many of whom are either devout Catholic or Orthodox Jews who send their kids to parish schools or to yeshivas. A state could step in, and if that went to a Supreme Court with justices that don't recognize that fundamental human right, we could see that basic exercise of parental right and religious freedom eroded. Right now, this is a case that Advancing American Freedom, where I work, is working on. We have a situation in Ohio, in University Heights, where the city attempted to deny the right of a man to host a prayer service in his home. Jewish prayer services require 10 men. They denied him the right to do so without first coming to the city for permission. That is working its way up now through the Supreme Court. That's a basic threat to constitutional liberty. So we're seeing it right now in the United States.
Well, I'll tell you this, that sounds insane. It makes absolute no sense to me. I don't even have time to tell you what my reaction to what you just said. But listen, I appreciate you both, Dr. SELTZ. I appreciate you both for joining us today for this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. And Joel, it's good seeing you, brother. It's always a pleasure. When we come back, the famous author John Leake, in his new book, author of Mind Viruses, America's Irrational Obsessions. That's up next on the Armstrong-Williams Show. Don't go away. So John Leake, let me welcome him to our broadcast house via Zoom, author of Mind Viruses, America's Irrational Obsessions. What do you mean by a mind virus, and how does an idea spread through society in ways that resemble a biological virus? Because that's what it is.
It's an irrational, destructive, self-sabotaging idea that in a climate of fear, propaganda and fear, we're told that a boogeyman is coming and he's going to get us. We lose our critical thinking ability, and then we place our faith in the U.S. federal government and its cronies and industry to save us. And as I document in the book, since 2021, we've seen this same script again and again and again. The face of the boogeyman changes, but the script remains the same.
So you know, this is what's interesting. Does an idea really spread through society in ways that resemble biological virus? And I'm talking to myself right now, and I guess you cannot sort of argue with that, because that's what the devil does so well. He's always been among us. But, you know, one of the book's central themes is that intelligence does not necessarily protect people from irrational thinking. Obviously, that is a truth. But then this is the follow-up. Why are educated and accomplished people often just as, and sometimes more susceptible to collective delusions as everyone else? Sometimes they're so smart until people think they're crazy.
Well, it's such a great question, and it was something that I've been scratching my head over, and it was a major part of my inquiry. You know, there was a German Protestant minister named Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany. He was arrested in 1944 as part of this plot to assassinate Hitler. And as Bonhoeffer was in prison awaiting his execution, he wrote an essay. The title is provocative, On Stupidity. And he asks the question, why is it that under certain circumstances, otherwise intellectually capable people, even people with high native intelligence, why do under certain circumstances such people, it's as though they're rendered stupid? They can no longer think for themselves. It's like they've been possessed by an irrational idea. as best as Bonhoeffer could figure, it's in a pressure, in circumstances of pressure where fear and power are being exerted on the people from something like a central power, and they just can no longer think straight. Fear seems to be the primary emotion that disables critical reasoning.
Yeah, but
even people who are otherwise intellectually agile.
But in all fairness, I mean, throughout history, societies have experienced periods of fear. I mean, legitimate. I mean, the Black Plague, wars. I mean,
Sure.
serial killers in the neighborhood. I mean, there are periods of panic and mass conformity. What makes fear such a powerful force in shaping public opinion? And what lessons should we have learned from recent years or past history?
Well, I think that you've really gotten to the essence of the book, of the inquiry. So fear is a useful, natural emotion in many circumstances in which we genuinely are facing a danger. I mean, if you look at, most of humanity, go back 250,000 years, we did live in extremely insecure conditions. We were constantly being attacked by neighboring tribes or wild animals, or the crop would fail, it would be a terrible winter, and there wasn't enough for people to eat. So anxiety and fear, these negative emotions, have great survival value if we're actually being threatened. But what has happened in our modern political environment is that unscrupulous politicians and their friends are constantly hijacking that archaic fear emotion in order to manipulate us. And so my book lays out a method for discriminating, when is a danger, how can we evaluate if a danger is real on the one hand, and then alternatively, is this being grossly exaggerated, misrepresented, or even fabricated outright?
So let me follow this up, because I think everyone is not just capable, but instill fear on some level to gain power or what they want. I think in many ways human beings can be very vulnerable and weak. But how much responsibility does traditional media and social media now bear for accelerating what you describe as mind viruses? Are they simply reflecting what you're saying, public opinion, are actively shaping it?
Well, let's take a concrete example that I go over in the book. In February of 2020, we were told there was this respiratory viral illness emanating out of China, and that it was coming to the United States, and it was coming for all of us, and that it posed a mortal danger to everyone, including young athletes. Well, a prudent and reasonable man would step back. You would watch this unfold for the first few weeks. We didn't really know, but pretty quickly evidence began to emerge that a lot of what our government was telling us about this, and moreover what our government was telling us was the solution, namely create out of thin air $2.2 trillion pursuant to the CARES Act, and distribute it to all of government's friends in the medical industrial complex. A prudent citizen would sit back and say, no, wait a minute. Does the available evidence support these representations? And I think you were one of the guys that, you too, there was an initial period of evaluation, but then you began to realize, a lot of what the government is telling us about this just doesn't really make sense. And I think that's what we need to learn how to do, how to rationally evaluate a purported threat rather than just freaking out and losing our minds.
Listen, I can't thank you enough for writing this book. I think this book is all so overdue. And there's so many iterations that you've talked about through philosophy that we all have read. And we have a minute left. What should others take away from this book? And where can they go out and buy it, John Leake?
What you can take away from it is it will show you how all of these so-called crises of the last 25 years, again, the face of the threat changes, but it's always the same script. So I lay out the script, I show how this is all connected, I show the psychology that is being activated when these mind viruses are incubated and set loose on the population. I show you how to immunize your mind, how to spot the next one before you overreact to it. You can get the book on Amazon. That's the best place to get it. And I would be most grateful if you would leave, if you like it, leave a review and a star rating.
I am so thankful that you wrote the book. Thank you for joining us to talk about the book, and I'm sure it's going to be a bestseller. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. We're out of here. Thank all of our guests for today's broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.